They declared me dead at 68. I let them bury me. Then I destroyed them 1 by 1 inch. Legally. Officially. Cleanly. A doctor signed the paper with a pen that didn't shake. A lawyer filed documents with practiced boredom. My children cried on cue. My husband, ex-husband, technically, stood at the back of the room. Eyes dry, hands folded, already free. I watched it all from a hospital bed that smelled of antiseptic and lies, my chest rising and falling slowly, deliberately, as if my body itself had agreed to disappear. I let them bury me. Not because I was weak. Because I finally understood something at 68 that I had been too busy surviving to see before. The world doesn't punish cruelty. It rewards planning. The first time they tried to kill me, they called it a complication. I had gone into the hospital for what was supposed to be a routine heart procedure. I remember the lights above me. Too bright, too white, and the way my youngest daughter, Elaine, kissed my cheek without really touching it. Her lipstick left no mark. That should have been my first clue. When I woke up, the doctor told me my heart had stopped for 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a long time, he said gently. You're lucky. Lucky. What he didn't say was that the dosage of my medication had been altered. That someone had signed off on it. That the nurse who administered it had been reassigned the very next day. What he didn't know was that I heard everything while I was gone. Not words. Not voices. Intent. There's a moment when you hover between living and dying where the truth has no reason to hide. I felt it then, sharp, unmistakable. They didn't want me alive. At first, I thought it was fear. I was the matriarch. The keeper of records. The woman who knew where the money was, where the mistakes were buried, which smiles were fake. But fear was only part of it. Greed was louder. You see, 3 months before my death, I had quietly updated my will. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. I had begun to suspect things then. The sudden interest in my health, the way my son asked questions about my insurance, the way my husband started locking his office door again. The new will placed everything in a trust. Controlled by me. Activated only if I was declared mentally unfit, or dead. They thought dead was easier. When the second incident happened, they called it a stroke. This time, I didn't wake up right away. I drifted. And in that drifting, I made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted me gone so badly, I would give them exactly what they wanted. The funeral was beautiful. I'm not being sarcastic. White lilies. Soft hymns. A polished casket that cost more than the car I drove for 20 years. My eldest son delivered a eulogy that sounded like he'd practiced it in the mirror. He talked about my sacrifices. My strength. My love. What he didn't talk about was how he had moved into my house before my body was cold. Elaine cried the loudest. She always had a talent for performance. She collapsed dramatically into her husband's arms, her nails digging into his suit jacket. I noticed she wore my pearl earrings. The ones I had told her I wanted buried with me. My ex-husband didn't speak at all. He didn't need to. Relief has its own voice. They buried an empty coffin. I was already somewhere else. The private clinic I had arranged years earlier, quietly, carefully, listed me as a long-term neurological patient under a different name. A contingency I had set up after watching a woman in my book club lose everything when her family decided she was confused. I never told anyone. Not even my lawyer knew the full extent of it. When I finally opened my eyes weeks later, the nurse smiled like she'd been waiting for me. "Welcome back, Margaret," she said. I almost laughed. No one had called me that in years. I spent the next 6 months doing nothing. That was the hardest part. No phone. No television. No internet. Just therapy, food, and silence. And thinking. I replayed every conversation from the last 10 years. Every dismissive comment. Every time my intelligence was underestimated because of my age. Every document I had signed without reading closely enough, because I trusted the wrong people. By the time I was strong enough to walk outside, I had a list. Not of revenge. Of order. You see, destruction is easy. Precision is art. I started with my husband. From afar. Through shell companies, I quietly acquired the building his firm rented office space from. Then I waited. 6 months later, the lease wasn't renewed. He lost his biggest clients within weeks. Stress has a way of loosening tongues. And when an anonymous tip about financial misconduct reached the right regulatory board, the investigation moved fast. By the time his accounts were frozen, he was drinking again. I never contacted him. I didn't need to. Next was my eldest son. The golden boy. The one who had convinced the others I was slipping. I didn't touch his money. I touched his reputation. Old emails resurfaced. Messages he had sent to interns. Contracts he had manipulated. A carefully timed leak to the press coincided with a promotion announcement. He went from celebrated to radioactive overnight. His wife left him within a month. Elaine took longer. She always did. She inherited my house. My clothes. My things. She redecorated. Painted over my walls. Turned my sewing room into a yoga studio. I watched it all through a private investigator's reports and photographs. When I was ready, I sent her a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. You wore my pearls too early. She spiraled. People don't talk about the power of uncertainty, but it eats from the inside. She started drinking. Started snapping at her children. Her marriage cracked slowly, then all at once. I never showed my face. Not once. By the time I reclaimed my identity, legally, surgically, methodically, there was nothing left to return to, which was exactly the point. I live now under my real name again. Different hair. Different posture. A life built on quiet mornings and long walks. Sometimes I pass people who knew me. They don't recognize me. And I don't correct them. Because the woman they buried at 68? She was tired. She was forgiving. She believed love meant endurance. The woman who came back? She understands timing. I didn't destroy them with anger. I destroyed them with patience. And the most satisfying part? They still think I'm dead. They still send flowers to my grave every year. Lilies mostly. Sometimes roses. Once daffodils. Elaine chooses them. I know because the investigator told me. She stands there for exactly 7 minutes. Never 8. Checking her phone twice, adjusting her coat, making sure anyone watching sees grief and not relief. My son doesn't come anymore. He stopped after the 2nd year. Once the shame became heavier than the memory. People think death ends things. It doesn't. It simplifies them. When you are alive but declared dead, the world loosens its grip on you. Expectations disappear. Obligations evaporate. No one asks you to explain yourself. No one interrupts your thoughts. You become invisible in the most powerful way possible. During my 2nd year away, I moved to a coastal town where no one asked questions. I rented a small house with blue shutters and a kitchen window that faced the ocean. Every morning, I made tea slowly. Not because I had nowhere to be, but because for the first time in my life, time belonged to me. I began writing things down. Not revenge plans. Not confessions. Truth. I wrote about the first time my husband corrected me in public and laughed when I went quiet. I wrote about how I learned to make myself smaller so conversations could end faster. I wrote about the years I spent being practical, which is a word people use when they benefit from your silence. I wrote about motherhood too, how love can blind you more efficiently than fear. When my children were small, I thought protection meant sacrifice. I stayed. I forgave. I smoothed edges and swallowed disappointments because I believed stability mattered more than honesty. What no one tells you is that children raised on quiet lies learn to lie loudly later. The signs had been there. The impatience when I asked questions. The irritation when I wanted explanations. The way my age became a punchline. Mom's old school. You wouldn't get it. Let me handle this. They didn't see me as weak. They saw me as in the way. And once you are in the way of someone who wants something badly enough, your humanity becomes optional. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me precise. I spent months studying people. Not my family, people in general. How they behave when they believe they are unobserved. How kindness is often performative. How cruelty is usually efficient. I learned that most people don't fear consequences. They fear exposure. So I exposed nothing directly. I let them expose themselves. The investigator I hired was meticulous, quiet, patient. He never asked why. He only asked how far. I told him. as far as they're willing to walk themselves. My son tried to rebuild his career quietly. Smaller firm, lower profile. But arrogance doesn't disappear. It just disguises itself. He made the same mistakes again. Trusted the same instincts. Hurt the same kind of people. I didn't need to intervene. Patterns always repeat when left uninterrupted. Elaine, on the other hand, tried to reinvent herself completely. New city. New circle. Wellness retreats. Inspirational quotes. She spoke about healing without ever naming the wound. Guilt does that. It becomes spiritual when it can't become honest. She once spoke at a women's luncheon about loss. About strength. About moving forward. I watched the recording. She used my phrases. That was the moment I decided to let her see me. Not fully. Just enough. I booked a seat in the back row at her next event. Different hair. Glasses. Softer posture. Older. She spoke confidently until her eyes passed over me. Just for a second. Her voice faltered. Not because she recognized my face. Because something in her recognized my presence. Fear doesn't always need memory. Sometimes it just needs proximity. Afterward, she rushed through the crowd, scanning faces, breathing shallowly. I left before she could reach me. That night she drank herself sick. The investigator called the next morning. She's unraveling, he said. I told him to stop watching. Some things deserve privacy. By the 5th year, everything they had taken from me had already rotted in their hands. Money without trust. Homes without warmth. Freedom without peace. I hadn't destroyed them. I had removed the illusion that they were entitled to survive untouched. As for me, I began to live again, but differently. I volunteered under another name. I read novels slowly, savoring sentences like they were food. I learned how my body moved now. How age changed balance and strength and patience. I stopped apologizing to myself for resting. That may have been the greatest revenge of all. One afternoon, walking along the shore, a woman asked me how old I was. 73. I said. She smiled. You don't look it. I smiled back. Ido. And I meant it. Because looking your age, after surviving what you were never supposed to survive, is not a flaw. It's a declaration. I didn't tell anyone my real birthday. When you are officially dead, time becomes optional. I celebrated years quietly, sometimes forgetting them altogether. Age stopped being a countdown and became a landscape. Something I moved through instead of raced against. In my 70s, my body spoke more honestly than people ever had. My knees complained in the morning. My hands stiffened when the air turned cold. But my mind felt sharper than it had in decades, because it was no longer cluttered with the need to be agreeable. I had spent most of my life translating myself into something easier for others to accept. Silence does that to a woman. It teaches her to become fluent in absence. I stopped being absent. I enrolled in a local writing class under the name Margaret Hale, my mother's maiden name. The instructor was young, earnest, convinced that wisdom arrived only through novelty. He spoke about finding your voice. I almost laughed. I didn't need to find mine. I needed to let it exist without permission. I wrote about ordinary things. A chipped mug. A creaking stair. The way people soften when they believe they are not being evaluated. The class loved my work. They called it restrained, elegant, observant. They had no idea it was written by someone who had once been legally erased. Sometimes, after class, I walked home slowly and thought about the woman I used to be. The one who stayed late at dinner parties to help clean, who apologized when others interrupted her, who thought patience was the same thing as virtue. I don't judge her. She survived with the tools she had. But I would not trade places with her again. The world treats older women like furniture. Useful. Replaceable. Easily ignored. I had learned to weaponize that invisibility. People spoke freely around me now. Secrets floated into the air. Because no one thought I mattered enough to hear them. It was astonishing what people confessed to someone they assumed was harmless. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench, a woman told me she was waiting for her husband to die so she could finally live. She said it with a laugh, like it was a joke. Her hands were shaking. I told her nothing. Some truths have to finish forming on their own. I heard about my ex-husband through the newspapers eventually. A small article buried in the business section. Disbarred. Health declining. Living alone. I folded the paper carefully and threw it away. Closure is not always confrontation. Sometimes it's distance that no longer aches. Years passed. I learned the rhythm of my days. Grocery shopping early, before crowds. Long afternoons by the window. Evening walks when the light softened everything it touched. Occasionally, memories would surface unexpectedly. The smell of my old kitchen. The sound of my son laughing as a child. For a moment, grief would press against my ribs. Not sharp, not violent, just heavy. I let it. Healing isn't about erasing pain. It's about making room for it without letting it take over the house. On my 76th year, give or take, I received a letter forwarded from an old address I hadn't used in nearly a decade. No return name. Just my former married surname written carefully, like someone afraid it might break. Inside was a single page. Elaine. She didn't apologize. Not directly. She wrote about dreams where I stood at the foot of her bed, watching. About how she couldn't remember my voice clearly anymore, and that scared her more than remembering it would have. About how motherhood had changed her in ways she hadn't expected, softened places she didn't know existed. She asked if I had ever truly loved her. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Love is not proven through answers. It's proven through restraint. I never wrote back. Some people need silence to finally hear themselves. In my late 70s, my hair turned fully white. I stopped dyeing it. I stopped trying to look younger. I stopped apologizing when people offered help I didn't need. There is a particular freedom in aging when you no longer bargain with the mirror. I took a train across the country once, just to watch landscapes change. Mountains gave way to plains. Cities dissolved into fields. I thought about how many women had lived entire lives inside a single radius, because no one told them they were allowed to leave. No one tells you that permission is a myth. You either take it or you wait forever. One evening on that trip, a man sat across from me in the dining car. He was kind, curious, not patronizing. He asked about my life. I told him I had been many people. He nodded like that made perfect sense. We talked until the train slowed for the night. When we parted, he touched my hand briefly, respectfully. It was enough. Desire doesn't expire. It simply becomes selective. I returned home with a lighter step. The house with blue shutters no longer felt temporary. It felt chosen. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about my grave. The stone. The dates carved into it. A life neatly summarized in a line. I wondered if anyone still visited. Then I realized something that surprised me. I didn't care. Because the woman they mourned had already been mourned by me long before she was buried. I had grieved her quietly, privately, thoroughly. What remained was not a ghost. It was a witness. And witnesses don't seek revenge. They seek truth. In my 80s, people began speaking to me more slowly. I noticed it first in shops, then at the doctor's office, then everywhere. Words stretched out, syllables softened. Voices dipped into that careful tone reserved for children and the elderly. At first it irritated me. Then it amused me. Then it became useful. People reveal themselves when they think they are teaching. I let them explain things I already understood. I let them repeat themselves. I let them feel kind. In return, they forgot to guard their truths. That's how I learned Elaine was divorcing. A woman in my writing group mentioned it casually, like gossip that had gone stale. Said Elaine had been having a hard time. Said she talked about her mother a lot. Said she seemed haunted. Haunted is what people call guilt when it refuses to fade. I didn't feel triumph. Only distance. Revenge had never been the point, not really. Survival was. Clarity was. The slow reclaiming of a self that had been negotiated away piece by piece. I began mentoring younger women at the community center. Informally, quietly. No speeches. No advice unless asked. Mostly I listened. Listening is an endangered skill. It makes people feel seen without being controlled. One woman told me she was afraid to leave her marriage because she'd wasted too many years already. I told her something I wish someone had told me at 40. Time is only wasted if you keep spending it on what no longer feeds you. She cried. I didn't touch her. I've learned tears need space, not rescue. On my walks, I passed a cemetery sometimes. Not mine. Just another one. Rows of names. Lives condensed into stone. I read dates and imagined the unlived years between them. The silences. The compromises. The bravery no one applauded. I wondered how many women there had been declared dead long before their hearts stopped. In my 83rd year, though the number felt abstract, I received another letter. This one had a return address. Elaine's handwriting was shakier. She wrote that she knew I was alive. She didn't explain how. She didn't accuse. She didn't demand. She simply wrote, "I don't want anything. I just need to know if you're safe." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Safety is a complicated word when your harm came from home. I walked to the ocean that day. The water was rough. Wind sharp. I watched waves rise and collapse without apology. I thought about the girl she had been. The woman she became. The choices she made to survive in a family that taught survival through domination. Understanding doesn't erase accountability, but it does soften the edges of anger. I wrote back. One page. No explanations. No forgiveness. Just truth. I am safe. I always was. I simply stopped being convenient. I mailed it from a town 2 hours away. Weeks passed. No reply came. And that was fine. Some connections aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be acknowledged and released. As my body slowed, my inner world expanded. Memory became less linear. Moments floated up uninvited. Sunlight on my wedding dress, my son asleep on my chest as a baby, the sound of my own laughter. Before it learned caution, I forgave myself for staying. Staying was never weakness. It was hope that outlived its usefulness. I prepared my affairs quietly. This time, there were no heirs in the traditional sense. I donated what I had to women's shelters, literacy programs, small libraries in forgotten towns. I left letters for no one. Legacy does not require recognition. It requires intention. One evening, sitting by the window, I caught my reflection in the glass. White hair. Lined skin. Eyes steady. I didn't look like the woman in the casket. I looked like someone who had outlived a lie. And then something unexpected happened. I felt peace. Not the loud kind. Not the triumphant kind. The quiet kind that arrives when nothing inside you is unfinished. They had declared me dead at 68. But the truth is, that was the year I finally became impossible to erase. As the years thinned out in front of me, I began to notice how often people confused stillness with emptiness. They would ask if I was lonely. I would smile and say, no. And I meant it. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of truth. I had lived with others for decades while starving for honesty. Now I lived alone and felt full. My days became smaller, but deeper. I watched birds argue over crumbs on the porch. I learned the exact hour the light hit the far wall in winter. I stopped rushing meals. I stopped filling silence. Silence, when chosen, is not punishment. It is rest. My health declined gently. No drama. No emergencies. Just the slow negotiation between what I wanted to do and what my body agreed to allow. I accepted help when I needed it. I refused pity. There is dignity in knowing the difference. A nurse began visiting twice a week. Her name was Rosa. She was efficient, warm, uncurious in the best way. She didn't ask about my family. She didn't assume absence meant tragedy. One afternoon, while checking my blood pressure, she said, "You seem like someone who's lived a full life." I corrected her softly. "I've lived a true one." She nodded like she understood. In my late 80s, perhaps 89, perhaps 90, I visited my grave. Not out of morbidity. Out of curiosity. The cemetery was quiet. The stone was clean. Someone had been tending it. Fresh flowers rested there. Simple ones. Daisies. I stood a few steps back and read my name. It felt strange. Like looking at a photograph of a stranger who shared my features. I felt no grief. No anger. Only gratitude. That woman had endured. So I could arrive. I didn't stay long. I don't believe in lingering where you are no longer required. On the walk home, I thought about the word destroyed. How people imagine revenge as fire and collapse and screaming. What I had done was quieter. I had removed myself from the roles they used to define me. I had let them live inside the consequences of their choices without me cushioning the impact. I had denied them my forgiveness, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. Forgiveness is not owed. It is earned. And sometimes peace comes from refusing to pretend it was earned when it wasn't. That night, I slept deeply, dreamless. In the morning, I woke with a strange clarity, a sense of completion, like a room finally cleaned after years of clutter. I wrote one final letter, not to my children, not to my husband, to myself. I thanked the woman I had been at 30, at 40, at 60. I thanked her for staying alive long enough to learn better, for believing survival was possible even when dignity felt expensive. I sealed the letter and placed it in a drawer. It didn't need to be found. Some truths exist simply to be acknowledged. As winter came, my body weakened quickly. Rosa noticed. She spoke gently. Arrangements were discussed. Paperwork handled. This time, everything was honest. When the end came, it did not feel like defeat. It felt like rest after a long, intentional walk. I was not afraid. Because I had already faced the worst thing a woman can face, being erased while still breathing, and I had survived it. They buried me once without my consent. This time, I went willingly. And somewhere, perhaps years later, someone will tell a story about a woman who disappeared and ruined the lives of those who tried to erase her. They will call it revenge. They will call it mystery. They will miss the truth. I didn't destroy them. I outlived their version of me. And that was enough. After that winter, time stopped behaving the way it used to. Days no longer lined up neatly. Memories drifted in without warning, not as scenes but as sensations. The weight of a child asleep on my shoulder, the ache in my feet after standing all day in a kitchen no one thanked me for. The warmth of sunlight on my face when I was young and didn't yet know how rare peace could be. I stopped trying to organize my past. I let it come as it wished. People often think the end of life is about holding on. It isn't. It's about loosening your grip on things that once felt necessary. Pride. Explanation. Even justice. What remains, if you've lived honestly enough, is a calm acceptance that your story was never meant to be understood by everyone. Only by you. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine my children as they were before ambition sharpened them, before fear taught them to calculate love. I wondered what I might have done differently. Not with regret, but with curiosity. Regret looks backward and freezes. Curiosity looks backward and learns. If I had left earlier, would they have become kinder? If I had spoken louder, would they have listened? If I had demanded more, would I have lost less? These questions no longer demanded answers. They were simply proof that I had once cared deeply. Caring deeply is not a mistake, even when it costs you. It only becomes a mistake when you refuse to stop paying the price. As my strength faded, people spoke about me as if I were already gone. Plans were made in careful voices. Decisions phrased gently, like apologies. I let them. Control is seductive, but release is wiser. On one of Rosa's last visits, she asked if there was anyone I wanted to call. I thought for a long moment. No, I said. There's no one I need to prove anything to. She smiled. That's rare. It shouldn't be. Most people spend their final years still auditioning for love. I had retired from that role long ago. In my final days, I dreamed of water. Not storms. Not drowning. Just wide, open water stretching endlessly. I wasn't swimming. I wasn't sinking. I was floating. When I woke, I felt light. As if the body that had carried me through betrayal, invisibility, patience, and precision was finally ready to be set down. There was no dramatic farewell. No savenduelesaschin. Just a quiet certainty that I had finished what I came here to do. I had protected my truth. I had denied cruelty its reward. I had lived long enough to see that power does not always announce itself. It often arrives disguised as absence. They declared me dead at 68. But death did not claim me then. It freed me. And when it finally did come for me, gently, respectfully, it found no unfinished business, no bitterness waiting to argue. Only a woman who had learned, at last, how to belong entirely to herself. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and hit the bell.